the EU's border with Belarus had shown action was needed in securing frontiers. Burkina Faso and Niger have issued a joint statement saying their combined armies have eliminated 100 Islamist militants in 2 weeks of operations. There's no independent confirmation of the claim, which was issued a day after Burkina Faso's president, Roch Kabore, sacked his prime minister in the wake of angry protests about increasing casualties caused by jihadist attacks. This week, at least 13 members of a civilian militia fighting the jihadists were killed in the north of the country. Workers at a Starbucks coffee shop in Buffalo in upstate New York have voted to start a union. Starbucks decertified unions in the US more than 3 decades ago, and it's fought hard to dissuade employees from joining. Organisers of the pro-union campaign say the pandemic and deteriorating work conditions have been catalysts for change. Casey Moore is one of them.
We just started a movement. This is the most incredible feeling in the whole entire world, to go through what we've done and then be victorious, which we are now with the first unionized Starbucks store in the United States. Feels like we're on top of the world.
Football in Colombia has been thrown into disarray after an apparent case of match fixing has forced the postponement of this weekend's Second Division Championship decider. In a qualifying match, Union Magdalena were losing 1-0 until the 95th minute, when players from the opposing team were seen holding back from the ball and conceding 2 goals in quick succession. President Ivan Duque described the incident as an embarrassment. BBC News.
They're slimy and slippery. They're part of the green film you see on garden ponds. They can clump together and wash up on the shores of beautiful beaches. A lot of them are invisible to the naked eye. But these underappreciated organisms that we call algae or algae in the USA are an essential component of life as we know it. They generate oxygen and are crucial building blocks of the food chain that sustains life in the oceans. They gave us crude oil and can nourish us as well. So isn't it time we paid more attention to algae? Hello, I'm Rajan Datar, and in this forum from the BBC World Service, I'm joined by the journalist Ruth Kassinger, who's the author of Slime, How Algae Created Us, Plague Us, and Just Might Save Us, by Dr. Brenda Soler Figueroa, a marine scientist at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center in Edgewater in the United States, who specializes in algal blooms, particularly in her native Puerto Rico, and Dr. Gethomi Virakun, whose work focuses on terrestrial algae and is senior curator of lichens and slime molds at the Natural History Museum of London, and author of Fascinating Lichens of Sri Lanka. Now then, as I mentioned, algae tend to be slimy life forms that may not seem immediately attractive or worthy of our attention. So can you each describe to me a species of algae that you find fascinating or even beautiful? I'll start with you, Ruth.
Well, I have to say that one of my favorite algae species is one that's commonly called snow algae, and it's a variety of microalgae that has red pigments. It lives in cold climates, in snow and ice, and it goes dormant in the winter. In the spring, when it becomes a little warmer and a little bit of the water of the snow melts, it multiplies rapidly and colors the snow pink. And if you walk across a patch of it, you will look behind you and you'll see a pattern of your own red footprints in the snow.
Wow, sounds beautiful, sounds beautiful. And to you, Brendan, and I know that you and Gathoni both hail from islands in the world where algae are abundant, and yours are in the sea. So tell me, what's your favourite alga?
My favorite algae is a bioluminescent dinoflagellate that I study for my master's and PhD. It looks like a sphere with 2 flagella or tails, and it is my beautiful algae because it is bioluminescent, which means that these organisms produce their own light. And especially in Puerto Rico, we have the so-called bioluminescent bays and lagoons, where these dinoflagellate is pretty abundant and make the water glow.
Wow. And at nighttime and daytime?
Nighttime, because in order to appreciate this phenomenon, it only occurs at night.
And tourists come from all over the world to see it.
Exactly.
Which must make you very proud. And Gutherme?
Actually, I brought a specimen with me from the museum. So this is a script lichen. It has orange lines on a whitish background that looks as someone has scribbled and sketched with an orange pen. This is an Alobefa species that belongs to the family of lichen called Graphidaceae. This family has a special partnership with the green algae called Trempifolia. Script lichens tend to grow on plants, and vast majority are found in the tropics, where I am from. In the tropics, they are dominant. Whenever I look at a tree trunk, a rock, a wooden bench, something even man-made surfaces like, glass, asbestos, tiles, I see them. I see them there.
Okay, well, I should say, by the way, that lichens tend to be a life form that usually combines a fungus with an alga. Is that right?
Yes, Rajan, yes.
Now then, maybe beautiful to all three of you, but I always suggest that their appearance is not the main reason for our interest in algae. And from these replies, I can already sense that algae come in many different forms. And yes, that is a source of fascination, but it's also a source of a lot of disputes between scientists as to what exactly is and is not an alga. Now, the definition changes frequently as science advances, so I'm suggesting that for the purposes of this program, we adopt a very broad scope and include some organisms, such as the blue-green algae or cyanobacteria, to give them their scientific name, that some botanists no longer consider part of the algae family. Right, so Brenda, now you study the tiny varieties, the microalgae, so give us a sense of their different forms and where you can find them.
I study microalgae, which are microscopic and unicellular organisms that live in the surface of the oceans, rivers, and lakes. But other phytoplankton organisms live in the sediments and are called phytobenthos, while others live attached to different macroalgae or seagrasses and are called periphyton.
And in terms of getting food, are there sources only photosynthetic? In other words, they use sunlight and nutrients in the water, or other means?
Yeah, that's a very great question. So in addition to the photosynthetic species, which are the ones that uses the energy from the sun and nutrients in the water to synthesize their own food from carbon dioxide and water, we have other species that are grazers. But more interesting are those phytoplankton species that not only can do photosynthesis, but they can also eat other microorganisms such as bacteria or even other phytoplankton when there are not enough nutrients in the water to do photosynthesis.
Okay. Now, Ruth, is it true that half of the world's oxygen production occurs in phytoplankton?
Yes, some people say, some scientists put that figure even higher at 60 or 70%. It's a little bit hard to measure, but algae, phytoplankton, cyanobacteria, they're all very important in terms of producing oxygen.
And on the other end of the algal scale are macroalgae, or basically large algae. So tell me, how big can they get? Can you give me some examples?
Sure. Macroalgae are more commonly known as seaweeds, and they vary in size. The largest are kelp, a kind of kelp, giant kelp, that can grow 150 feet tall in the ocean. They live off the coast, and they attach themselves to the sea floor and send up their blades, which look like leaves, to the surface. And they can look like, or when they're a lot of them together, like a forest of kelp. fish and sea lions and other animals love the protection of the kelp forest. On the other end of the spectrum, there can be little seaweeds that are no bigger than your thumbnail. But most of them are in the range of fist size to shrub size. And they come in all kinds of different colors: red, yellow, green, even some blue, brown, golden. They're quite a beautiful addition to the life on the planet.
I think, mentioning seaweed and kelp, that's basically what most of us would know when it comes to algae, and we'll talk about seaweed later in the program. But Ruth, tell me, how many species of algae have been identified so far?
Scientists have identified about 72,000 species, but that's not to say that there aren't more, and maybe even a lot more, of the tiniest algae out there that are yet to be identified. One of the remarkable things is that in a single drop of seawater, you can have thousands of individual algae. So if you swallow a drop of seawater while you're swimming, you've swallowed a lot of algae.
Okay. Now, as we know, algae have been around for a very long time, and exactly how long is a matter of scientific debate, because new finds of algae fossils are being described quite frequently. Professor Stefan Bengtsson and his team at the Swedish Museum of Natural History in Stockholm recently identified some very old algae fossils from India.
We have fossils of large algae-looking structures from at least 1.6 billion years ago, and possibly something like 1.7, 1.8. Before that it becomes rather dodgy, although there is evidence of larger structures even earlier than that, but we don't know what they are. But the oldest alga that I'm comfortable with occur in Indian Strait, about 1.6 billion years old.
How would you know that a billion-year-old fossil is an alga rather than a different type of organism?
The reason I can be confident that they are algae is that they are preserved to the cellular level. In other words, you can see the cells, count the cells, and see how they are attached to each other. And you can also see structures within the cells. They are probably not cell nuclei, but they are structures that we normally consider to be characteristic of algal fossils or algal organisms, or to be more precise about it, eukaryotic organisms.
Now, even with all these methods, I mean, it's striking that there is still considerable disagreement amongst scientists about what exactly each fossil is and how old it is, which is now relevant to the next question, which is the evolution of green-blue algae, cyanobacteria. So, number one, Brenda, where does their distinctive colour come from?
The blue color is due to a photosynthetic pigment called phycocyanin or phycocyanin, which has that bluish color. And the green, of course, due to chlorophyll.
Is there anything you want to add to that, Gavani?
So, in lichenized condition, when algae are found, still they maintain these particular colors within the lichen body, or we call it as thallus. So any green algae trapped in the lichenized condition, they look green because they have this chlorophyll pigment, which is green color, that can absorb sunlight. And also cyanobacteria, when they come to the lichenized symbiotic relationship, they are like blue, brown, the typical cyanobacteria photosynthetic pigment colors.
Now, about 2.5 billion years ago, a change began on Earth that transformed life here. It's known as the Great Oxygenation Event. Now, the level of oxygen in the atmosphere gradually rose from very small amounts, and the process took hundreds of millions of years, but it did cause both the extinction of many existing organisms and major changes to the Earth's chemistry. Now, the timing of this event is generally accepted in the scientific community, but there is a debate whether cyanobacteria were the drivers or the beneficiaries of this event. So here is Stefan Bengtsson again.
Well, first of all, we can't really trust the fossil record